start, does anybody have any questions or anything I should go through? Anything?
I thought the spinner docs were pretty cool, but that's about it.
Tight. Okay. Well, I don't know. I get the impression that like people are struggling with this. Maybe that's wrong. But if you are, I mean, most likely everybody else is too. So we can slow down. We can kind of try. We can like, kind of start from the fundamentals again if we need to potentially. So I don't know. I can try and maybe I'll put together like an anonymous poll, and we can go from there. All right, yeah, but let's get started. I need to figure out a way to make this thing just let people in. I don't know why I have to accept everybody. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. Is this? Can you guys see this okay? But too small? It's okay. All right, so today we're gonna start looking at what's called a component library. So you guys learned Bootstrap in like the first module, and Bootstrap is like a CSS framework. And when you get to starting to use like a front end framework like React or Angular or Vue, you'll typically use what's called, like when you start using one of those, you'll typically use a component library whenever you're making your visual front end. So just like when we were learning CSS, we showed Bootstrap and everyone was like, oh wow, like you can like do stuff, like you can like get really good looking stuff really quickly if you use Bootstrap. When you're using React or another framework like React, typically you use a component library, which will like help you really quickly build out the functionality of the page that you need. So you should have, for the pre-work for today, you should have looked at this like, intro to React Bootstrap and like why use React Bootstrap. And then the spinner docs was just like giving you one example of one component that's available to you within React Bootstrap that you can use. And you're getting to the point now where you guys have like learned so much stuff that you're now experiencing what most developers do day to day, which is like read the docs on something and then try to integrate it. So if I, as a developer, decided at the shop that I'm working at to use React Bootstrap as my component library, which there's a bunch of different component libraries out there that you can choose from. So there's like Material UI, there's Anti, there's stuff that you can do with Tailwind, it's like Chakra UI or something. I just heard that one the other day. But there's like a ton of different component libraries out there. And so if I'm at a shop and it's like, hey, let's use React Bootstrap, then when I'm trying to learn it and set it up for the first time, I go through the docs. Like that's what every developer does. And then as you start implementing and using that component library, you just read the documentation to figure out how to do it. And then if something's confusing or not in the documentation, then you'll typically like Google it and you'll find like a Stack Overflow potentially. So like the homework, the pre-work for you guys was like the exact same work that any other developer would do if they were using that component library for the first time. So yeah, today we're just going to be, adding the component library to our weather app that we built so far and just making it look better and just seeing what it looks like to use a component library. Yeah, so there was this React Bootstrap intro. And so like, yeah, you'll go to the documentation site. You might go to home first and like click, get started or like jump right to the components. So like get started has this introduction and it's like, here's how you install it. And then here's an example of importing components. And then this part might have been a little confusing to you. Like you can either add the styling in the index.html, or you can just import it in the like index.js or the app.js. You can see them kind of saying that here. So this is what any other developer would read the first time to start, like to get React Bootstrap into a React project that they're working on. And then you would start looking at other stuff that you want to use. So let's start with this piece first, just getting it in our project using Create React App. So, so I'm back in the terminal and I'm gonna navigate to where I want to make this new Create React App, which will be module 4, day 5. And then I want to make this new project right here. So what's the command to make a new React app? Someone's got to unmute, or I'm just going to sit here and wait. Or you can put it in chat. I guess that I'll accept that if someone's done that. All right, what's the command to make a new React app? Named Weather Bootstrap.
npx create React app weather bootstrap.
Thank you, Frank. Good. So, oh, dude, this keeps happening to me. I wonder how I set that. I'll have to set that globally. All right, so while that's running, we can check out the docs. So the first, Carl, hey, it's all right. It's okay. So first thing is, hey, you need to install, Carl. You need to install React Bootstrap, which is this library, but then you also need to install Bootstrap. So like whenever you do npm install, the dogs are playing. Guys. All right. So whenever you run npm install, you can actually, if you put a space, then you can install like more than one library at a time. So this is saying install React Bootstrap and Bootstrap in the same command. So I'm going to copy that. So this is done setting up the React app. And so I can CD to it. And then now I'm going to paste that command that I copied. So I'm going to install those two things. Okay. So I don't know, you'll often get some warnings and stuff like that. At this point, don't worry about those things. All right, so I want to copy what we had from last class. So remember what last class we did where we were fetching the weather forecast information. So I'm gonna go to day 4 and go to the weather, and then within the app.js we had this code, which was, you know, getting the query for the location that we wanted to query for, and then submitting a request to the API. So I'm gonna copy all this, and then paste that in the app.js for day 5. Oh, work. Okay, so I pasted that in, and then I don't think I changed CSS or anything. Yeah. Okay. So here's where we left off from Saturday. And I'll save this. And what do I need to do to start seeing this application in the browser? Like, how do I start my React app? I'll accept an answer from Frank again, or in the chat, or anybody. There's like a command I run in the terminal to start developing the React project. And whenever I made it, it told me it. It's somewhere right here. Anybody? Yes, npm start. Thank you. All right, so npm start. All right, so here's where we left off. And I think when we search, yeah, we haven't displayed the forecast or anything yet. We were just parsing the city information from the response. So we have that. And then here's how it looks currently. And then I think if we've installed React Bootstrap, but we haven't imported that CSS file that has all the bootstrappy stuff in it. And so they show you, hey, to do that, we do this import here. And they said you can do that in the index or the app.js file. So it doesn't matter. We'll do it here in the app.js. And you can see, I think it changed how this looked after I did that. Everything looks bigger, actually. So yeah, so here's how it looks now. And then when I didn't have it, it was honestly, this looks a little bit better to me, but so we know it's working now. So we have the Bootstrap CSS and it's changing our stuff. to look a little bit differently. So I think we know it's working. So we could also like look at the H3 and I'm not sure which CSS file is doing that. Yeah, so like without it, we have just the app CSS, and then when we do have it, there's all this CSS coming from Reboot. So I don't know, I guess that's what they called it for some reason. All right, so I think we've done what we've needed to get Bootstrap going just like in the minimum amount. So I think we're good here. And so now we can test and see if we import a component that it will work correctly. So they give an example of here's how you can import a button. And so let's try, we have a button in our weather app here. So we got this search button. So let's make that look better by using the Bootstrap button. So we can, to typically learn how one of these components work, you would go to the components thing, part of the documentation, and then jump to buttons. And then you can see like, here's the buttons. And here's the code for how those work. So it's like, they like made, like just how you can make a custom component in React named whatever you want. So like, you know, you can make a new file and export a function that's named something. And then in your render, in your JSX, you can then like call or like use that custom component. They've done that same thing. They made a button component for us that is going to look like this Bootstrap version of it without having to do all the class stuff that you normally would do. So it's just like it's just a little bit cleaner. So we're just importing this custom button that React Bootstrap made. So I'm going to copy the primary one. So I'll copy that. And we're going to use that here. So instead of just the default HTML button here, we're going to use this React one. So it's a capital B button. And then the variant is primary. So what I'll do is I'll delete the one I just pasted in and then just capital B button. And then add the variant equals primary prop that they specified here. So variant primary, or if you want, depending on which one you want, it just kind of changes the styling. So success is, you know, green. So there's that. We're getting an error though, because it doesn't know what this is. It's like, hey, I don't know what that is. And that's because we haven't imported it. So to import it, typically they show that in the documentation, but they may not for once you like dig into the details. But we saw like on their getting started, they showed like, here's how you import a component. It's React Bootstrap / the name of the component. So there's two different ways to import it. And they're just saying this one's less ideal just because it's a performance thing that you guys don't need to worry about quite yet. But doing it this way, like, will potentially make the size of your page a little bit bigger than it needs to be because it's importing more than it needs. So they want you to do it this way. So I'm going to copy this and put that here. And so now that error should go away. And so now we're using the React button. And voila, looks a lot better. So if you decide to use a component library, then you pretty much like for every thing that the component library provides, you just use that instead of the default built-in HTML stuff. And you just get it's just like you get a better looking app, just like really, really quickly without having to do a bunch of styling and stuff like that. So a lot of people, really like that because you can just really quickly make something that looks good. But typically, if you're working at a place, you'll want to like customize it a little bit and make it look a little bit different. And you can still do that. You can still kind of customize the way stuff looks and make it look like unique to your brand on top of the component library. So you can like customize the component library. It doesn't have to look like the default of the component library. Okay, so I want to just kind of keep adding some stuff from here. So the next thing we can try is this form if we wanted to, like make this, like we got these two inputs. So we can kind of use the React form to make it look a little bit better. So they have a section here in the documentation called forms that we can go to. And they're like, here you go, here's how you do it. And then you just copy it in. It's great. So for that, it's we use this like form and form group and label and control, and then you don't have to use this text thing. So I'm just gonna copy this whole thing in, and then we'll just delete a little bit of it to make it work for what we're doing. So here's our existing form. So I'm gonna just kind of move it down and then paste this new one in. Okay, so it doesn't know what form is, so we need to import form. And as you can, I don't know this for sure, but my guess is that it's import form from React Bootstrap / form is my guess. So, okay, now it's not so mad. And we can double check and see if it's working. So yeah, we're getting that form. And so we just need to customize that a little bit. So for our form, we have our on submit. So I'm gonna copy that, put it up here. So like those same properties we used before will also work on the React Bootstrap one. And then I don't know what this control ID is. I'm just going to delete it. So label is going to be location, query. Type is going to be text. And we can use a placeholder if we want here. So we could say, enter location to look up weather for. And I'm just going to get rid of this extra little like description thing. So all I did was copy what we have here up to here. But then they like instead of input, they're using this form.control thing. But we want to do this value and this on change thing on this form control. So like this form.control is like their version of the input. So I'm gonna copy both those up there. Okay. And if you're curious, like I have like a formatter on, so whenever I save, it like auto move that stuff for me. That's what happened, if you're wondering. All right, so we did the first one, and then we want the second input, which is days to forecast. So I'll just do the same thing I did before. Days to forecast. Yep, and then it is type number. And then we don't need this other checkbox thing. And then we just need to copy our value and on change. And then the button should work. So we've got, well, I guess we want to put search instead of submit. But it's variant primary, it's fine, and then type equals submit. So they already had type equals submit like we did. So I think I replicated like the basic HTML form into the React Bootstrap form purely just by reading the docs. Like I haven't done this yet. Like I am literally doing what I would normally do, which is like read the docs and do it. So like this may not work, I don't know. But like that's the process that I would take as a developer, you know, using this library for the first time. It's just like copy what's in the docs and then just adapt what I had done before to fit it. So I think I did it right. So I'm going to delete this old form and then we can find out. So we still have like, so you notice like we just have the React form or the React Bootstrap form now. And then like the default values are showing up like they did before. I need to refresh this though, so it doesn't have that Oklahoma City thing already there. So yeah, this looks right. And then we can see if search is still working. It looks like it did. And then I don't know what, do anybody know like the Norman zip code? Or like any other zip code? 73072. Yeah, so we're good. It's working. All right, so yeah, that's the process of using a component library is literally that, like looking at the docs and then just like copying it in and then adapting it to your needs. So, oh, okay, there's a question for Shonda. Yeah, I don't know if you can or not just like import all of them. The reason you import them individually is more of a performance thing. But also like, you don't want to just like litter the global, sorry, so I'm referencing the question Shonda asked in chat, but you don't want to just like litter a file with like a bunch of global names unnecessarily. And I mean, I know that that's normally the case, like in the stuff that we've used so far, like when you use a JavaScript file, like just by default, there's a bunch of stuff there. But when you start getting, like now that you're further into like the advanced, like you're doing highly customized stuff, meaning like you're using like frameworks and you're like not just using the base language stuff, like the typical style is to, you know, only import what you need into a file. So I agree, like it may be nice to not have to do those imports whenever you want to add like another thing. But that's just kind of the way you'll typically see stuff like this set up now that we're a bit further along. We're doing more advanced stuff. And also you can have it like VS Code can like auto import stuff for you, so you won't be that annoyed by having to do that. Like you can, I'll show you guys that eventually, but like whenever it was complaining at me because it didn't know what form was, like if I commented this out, it's like, hey, I don't know what form is. You can, well, you actually have to have TypeScript. So eventually we'll learn TypeScript. But like it'll like in this scenario, you can like hit a command and like it'll auto add that import for you. So like if you found that like annoying, like I was like figuring out how to type it, like I find that annoying too. And normally I don't do that because I work in TypeScript and it'll like auto import it for me. So that's maybe a better answer to your question. But we're just not quite using TypeScript quite yet. All right, so we've got this cool form, and then now we may want to use additional components to like flesh out this application a little bit more. So we may want, like we want to get that forecast information, and so we want like multiple items to show up on the screen. And so we may use, for like, so what I would typically do is like, okay, I want to like show multiple items. And so I would just like go to the documentation and be like, all right, what do you got in here that'll suit my needs? So it's like, okay, well, like I can use a table. So I can go to a table and see what a table looks like and say, okay, it'll look like this. So like, I guess we could do like multiple days of forecast and a table potentially. That might look okay. Or you could be like, what else is here? And they have cards, so we could like look at cards and see what cards look like. So they got, you know, this thing that can have an image and a title and then a body and then like a action button. Or they have like more simple cards, you know, with like just a title and a subtitle and text. And you can like pick what you want. Like you don't have to have a subtitle. You can just like not have it in there and it won't show it. So yeah, to show like multiple days of weather forecasts, like it's kind of up to you. Like you may want to do a table, you may want to do like a list of cards, but you've got, you know, something most likely in the component library that you're using that's going to give you some like decent looking thing, you know, quickly out of the box. So I probably would lean towards cards because like we did have an image. It's a little too big. Showing like we had that like sun icon that came back from the API based off the forecast, but that's probably too big to show. But I still think a card would be pretty good based off my, I don't know, that's my preference. So that's one thing that we can try to implement here is using the cards with the forecast data that we're getting back. The other thing that can be good is you guys saw the spinner in your pre-work. So the spinners here are, you know, for loading when you're loading data. So you often like will see a spinner whenever you shouldn't be interacting with the page and you note and it's like telling you that you should wait. So, you know, how do you implement using one of these spinners in React whenever we query for data? So I think we should go ahead and try doing that with the rest of the time that we have left. And then we can do the rendering the multiple cards next time. So let's see, what spinner do we like? I like, I don't know. Maybe this, I don't know. We'll just go with the first one. All right, so we'll go with this one. So let's just get the spinner in there and working. So I kind of want, I don't know, I'm trying to think where I want to show this. I don't know, maybe like right here. So like we wouldn't show city in Oklahoma City. And we would show that spinner while it's doing the search. So down here we've got, you know, weather data.location.name. And then this thing that we would show. And so let's just throw the spinner right here for now. So I'm going to paste what we copied and import that. Okay, so there's that. So it's
You're on mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
sorry, I hit refresh like on the meeting instead of on the browser. 1 second.
We thought you were demonstrating what it's like if there's not a spinner.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the spinner is there. It's just there all the time. And so we only want to show the spinner whenever they are actively sending a query. So like they hit search, and then in between hitting search and receiving data back from the network, that's when we want to show the spinner. So does anybody have any ideas of like how we may accomplish that? I won't force an answer this time. This one's a harder question.
I don't know. Maybe a promise, like waiting till you get the information and then stop showing it.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So we can like hide it based off something, and then whenever we're doing the search, show it while the search is happening, and then once the search is done, like hide it again. So, does anybody know, like what do we need to use in React to like capture those different states? This is from Saturday. Like every question has the same answer, which is what in this case? State, yes. So yeah, like we just need something in state that says like searching or loading or show spinner, like just something in state. And by default, it starts off as like false. So we say like, you know, like searching, and by default it's false. And then whenever we start the query, we can say show it. And then whenever we're done with the query, we'd say hide it. So yeah, that's all we need to do. And so we can go in, we've got all of our state declarations up here. So we'll just add it up here. So we'll say const, and we can say like any of those options I gave are fine. So I'll just go with loading now. So loading, and then set loading, and then we'll do, you know, use state, and the like default here for us is going to be false. So like whenever you load the page, you haven't started the search, and so that's going to be false to start. So then here's our function for submitting our search, and then, you know, here's where we say, you know, fetch the data and then get the data. And so we just, I mean, it's pretty simple. We just sort of wrap this stuff in like two set state calls. So they've hit submit, so we'll say set loading to true. Then we send the query, we await for that to come back, we parse the JSON, and then once that's done, we would then say, set loading false. So it's as simple as that. And then, so we've got like a piece of state set up that, will be false and then true when we're doing the loading and then false when we're not. So what do you think I'm going to do with that piece of state in order to like correctly show the spinner? Like how am I going to modify this line here to use that? Anybody know? So it's pretty similar to line 54. So like we just want to conditionally render the spinner, and to which is exactly what we're doing to conditionally render the weather data. Like we're not showing that like city, Oklahoma City, from we're parsing the response we get from the weather API and pulling the city out of it and showing it on the page. But we only show it on the page when we actually have data that we've gotten a response for. So just like that, while loading is false, we don't want to show the spinner. And so we can do this exact same strategy that you see here, which is this kind of fancy trick where you like check something, and then only if it's true do you then actually render this JSX. This is just one way of conditionally rendering something. We can do that same trick here. So we'll do like evaluate JavaScript brackets and then say loading. And if it's loading, then we want to show the spinner. So that's what this says. So if loading is false, then don't add this to the page. If loading is true, then do load this on the page. So if we go back here, we don't see the spinner. Now my network is so fast that like the query comes back so quickly, so you won't really be able to see the spinner. But you can actually simulate a slower connection if you go to the network tab in the console, and then you can see there's this no throttling dropdown. And so I can say, hey, do like slow 3G. And it'll like simulate my network being slower. And so then we can see the spinner, and then we got the data back, and then the spinner went away. And then I can change this to some other place, and we can see that spinner again. Okay. Any questions on that so far? Okay, cool. All right, so let's we got 15 minutes left. Let's talk about props again, and let's just talk a little bit about making your own component. So everything we've done so far has been all in this app.js file. So all the code that we've written is in one JavaScript file. And as projects get bigger and bigger, that's quite unwieldy. Like, you don't want thousands and thousands of lines of code in a project. Like, you want it, or in one file, you want it kind of broken out and organized. So the main way that we achieve organizing stuff in React is by making our own custom components. So if you think about what we have so far in our app, we've got the kind of main page here, then we've got a submission form, and then we have the results of the submission form. So, I mean, just one initial way we could break this down is we could say, okay, we've got the main app, and then we've got the submission form. That could be its own component. And then we've got the results to display. And then that could be its own separate component. So let's start with just making the search results its own component. So that is essentially, we don't have much to that quite yet, but that's this piece here. So I'm going to make a new JavaScript file, and I'm going to call it I'm going to call it forecast.js. And I'm going to move it to the side here. So to make a new component, we just write a function, and then you typically do title case for it. And then that function then just needs to return some JSX, and then you need to export that function so it can be imported into something else. So I'm going to name it, since I have the name of the file as forecast, that's going to be the name of the function as well. So I'm going to do function forecast export default, I think. Yeah, export default forecast. And then in here, I just need to return something, and that something is what we've got here. I'm trying to break out stuff I have in app into a new component. So I'm going to delete some stuff that's in app and move it to this new component. And so that's what we have so far of the forecast, which is just displaying the city that the forecast is for. So I'm going to pull this out, put it over here. Now, we see by doing that, we see the first problem, which is this file, this new component, doesn't know what weather data is. And that's because weather data is a piece of state defined on this main app component. So weather data is something we define from use state that gets set whenever we receive data back from the API. So this new component that I'm making doesn't know about that. So how do we pass information into a component? What do we use for that? So it's not so that's one way that we could pass information to like a JavaScript file, would be exporting it and then importing it in the other file. But there's a specific React method of passing data to a component, because we're going to be like, we have this state that's defined, which is weather data, and we need to pass weather data into the forecast component. And does anybody know what that thing is called that we use to pass information into a component? It's like on this spinner, like these two things are what I'm talking about. So this is how you like, this is spinner is a React component we imported, and we're passing information into it, which is this animation and this variant key, but that's called a specific thing in React. Does anybody know what that is? No. So it's props is what that's called. So yeah, and let me pull up. So here's yeah, here's where they talk about props a little bit if you want to check this out. But yeah. So I would check out this this part of the documentation on React to learn a little bit more about props. So yeah, like normally like in just plain HTML, like these are like attributes that you would see, like, and class is one of the attributes you can pass here. But in React, like you can just pass any arbitrary thing that you want in terms of like data that is in your application, and you can pick any key name that you want. Sorry, one second. So so I'm going to pass a prop into forecast, which is going to be the weather data. So what you do is it's sort of like a parameter. So it's called, you can like, there's a few ways to do it, but I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to accept props in the forecast component. And one of the props that I'm going to pass is going to be weather data. And so I can do props dot weather data. Why does it matter to me? Oh yeah, I don't need. What's this man about? Oh. Sorry, I just forgot. Like whenever you're making a new React component, you typically the boilerplate is return with these parentheses and then with these like empty bracket tags, and then you put your HTML in here, or it can be like a div. Like you can see on the app, we have like a parent div that everything is wrapped in. So you need like at least you just need one root element that it returns, which can be a div or anything else as long as there's no siblings. And so like this could also be a div if we wanted it to be. But if you don't care, you can just do this like no tag thing. Okay. So I'm gonna accept this weather data as a parameter into this component. And so it's gonna be on props. And so I've exported forecast. I need to import it over here and use it. And so I'm going to do forecast like this. And it doesn't know what that is quite yet. So I need to import it. So that import just looks like import forecast from /forecast. And then I need to pass weather data into it. And so that looks like weather data equals weather data. I know that might have been a little hard to follow. But let me just show you that it's working. Let's just make sure it's working real quick. So no, we don't see anything yet. And then when we search, it broke. So that's cool. So let's see what console error we got. All right. Okay, so it said forecast is not defined. Forecast is not defined. That doesn't make any sense. Oh, oh, it's so great. Okay, sorry. So whenever you throttle your network, it slows everything down. So like even the like refresh of the page was slowed down. So I need to go back to no throttling. And so it can actually like refresh the page relatively quickly. I think that's what the problem was. So we'll find out. Okay, yeah, so it's working. Okay, so yeah, so this is working as it did before, but instead of everything in app.js, we made a separate component. So when you make a separate component, often that like new component is going to depend on some data or some state or something from the parent component that's going to render it. So app.js is the thing that's importing the new component we made, and it's the thing that's rendering it here on the page. But app.js is the thing that does the query. It's the thing that does the fetch to get our weather data and then sets that weather data in our state. And so we need some way to pass information from one component to another. And the way you do that is with props. And you can see the format of what that looks like is you say, here's the name of the attribute, and here's the value of it. So you can think of that as like a function that takes a parameter, and that parameter has a name, and then that parameter gets a value associated with it. So you can think of this almost as like calling a forecast function and then passing a named parameter to it, which and in this case, this may look a little confusing because the parameter name is weather data, and then the thing that has the value that I want to pass is the state weather data. But like, so think of this as like a function call that's getting data passed into the function call. And then here's the component forecast. It's taking this thing called props, but on props, like if I just console log props, you'll see that it's just an object with a key called weather data that has my weather data on it. So this is like an object, props dot weather data, just accessing a property on that object. So if we look in the console here, you can see like here's my, let me just refresh the page. So here's my console log from my forecast component. And you can see it's an object with a key called weather data. And then the value of that key is simply the stuff we fetch from the API, which is stored in state in that weather data property. All right. So, all right, that's all the time we have for today. So I'll push the stuff up. If you guys are struggling, I know it is like, this is like advanced JavaScript stuff, but like there's not too many React concepts. Like this was like, we're actually done. Like today we learned mainly React Bootstrap. Like there's not like a bunch of new React stuff to learn. Like there's like React components, and then there's use state, and then there's use effect, and then there's like passing props into components, and like that's it. Like we've covered like most of the concepts. So it's just like getting used to seeing them and understanding how they work and working with them. So like the remaining classes are like not new React core concepts. It's like, how do you use other React libraries that are out there? So I know it's maybe a little confusing at first, but if you just start looking at it and playing with it and changing it, like the code that we're doing in class, I think it'll click at some point. So yeah, thank you, gang, and see you on Saturday. Yeah, Natasha, what's up?
That was just an accident.
Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, you guys too. Yo, James.